Hello and welcome to the November 25th edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm David Morassutti flying solo on today's show, and we'll pay tribute to Börje Salming, who lost his battle with ALS. And we'll also look at the upcoming back-to-back for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who look to build some momentum after that crazy win in New Jersey. This is the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your daily fix for all things Leafs. I'm your host, David Morassutti from Sportsnet. Mike DeStefano isn't able to join us today, but no worries. We have lots to go over, obviously with sad news in Leafsland, but we also have some bigger question marks for this team with a back-to-back coming up. Locked On Leafs, as we all know, is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, so be sure to subscribe for free wherever you get your podcast from. And as you know, you can catch us up on YouTube, Locked On Leafs, so make sure you go and subscribe. And if it's your first time listening to the podcast, thank you for the first listen. Hopefully you stick around for the ride. Also, today's podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Obviously, it's, the last few days has probably been a heavy one for a lot of Toronto Maple Leafs fans with the very shocking news that Börje Salming passed away. Shocking in that, obviously, with his battle with ALS, we were expecting, sad news eventually down the road, but I don't think many of us expected it to happen this quick. And I mean, even when it's expected, it's never. That news was coming down. Obviously, wanted to wait for an official word from the team and when the team was going to put something out. So a very, very somber and sad day to get that notification. I was actually at, for those who know, I covered the CFL, I covered the Toronto Argonauts, and they were having their championship rally. And during the rally, we got the news almost near the end. Thankfully, they didn't put it out during it because that would have been a little bit tough to go through. But it was really sad. It caught a lot of people off guard that you kind of just hear about it. And it also, though, reminds us how important that trip was for him to come here. You know, everyone, though, anybody who talked about Börje Salming with his former teammates the last few days, every single one of them couldn't have been any happier that he got this chance to come back home to, let Leafs fans kind of salute him in the way he needed to be saluted. This is such a tough battle for him. He needed that, I think I have to be at peace and knowing that, reminder that how important he was to this organization and important to this fan base. So it was obviously a sad moment, but also I think, you think of the family, you think of what they were going through, and for them to have that experience, that positive experience. I talked about that on the podcast too, that, not only was that important for the Salming, for the fans, for the organization, but for his family to have a positive memory, right? The last few months since the diagnosis was announced in August, and probably even before that, it was probably a really, really tough period for his family. And, they probably needed something positive. So it was great that he was able to do it. I mean, and I think even just if they ever needed any more comfort, go to the many tributes that have been pouring online. I mean, there was one in Sweden when they announced his passing. There was an SHL game going on. That's the Swedish Hockey League for anybody who doesn't know. And they were having a game, and during the game, fans started chanting Borje Salming. Like, it gave me chills when I saw that. It gave me chills. Maybe I'll throw it in so you guys can hear it if you haven't seen the clip yet. And just such a chilling moment to hear, a moment like that. It shows how important he was to that country. We appreciate sorry, we appreciate him here as Leafs fans what he did for the Leafs, what he did for hockey. But you think about over there, like he's like a legend. He's a hero to a lot of those people over in Sweden. So very sad day, but it's also very nice that, you know, he gets recognized in the way he's being recognized. And I think even the most important thing through all this is that, he's not suffering anymore. This is a very tough situation for him to go through. And the last thing you want with ALS, and you've seen countless people. You don't have to personally know somebody who's going through ALS, but you might see the constant, stories about people who deal with ALS and how tough it is to deal with that. You see the ones who have to go on feeding tubes, the ones who lose their total mobility and can't walk, and so they're confined to a wheelchair. And I mean, these guys put up such a brave fight to fight this disease. But giving Salming's age and all the struggles he had already started to go with, um, Daryl Sittler made it a point to say, you know what, you're kind of at peace knowing that he's not suffering and he won't be going through prolonged suffering. So while it's a sad day for these fans and it's a sad day for the Salming family, that's an important thing to know is you don't have to your memories aren't filled with total suffering. There's going to be some, but it's you can try to push out some of those bad memories with the good ones that you can remember with. So Börje Salming, I would argue one of the greatest Leafs defensemen of all time, deserving of his lore atop of the Leafs rankings as a top player. And someone who set a great example for a lot of the players on the team currently. I think of the Swedish players like Nylander, Sandin, who got a chance to meet him, Matt Sundin. How much Salming helped him when he became the captain, right? Those little things that maybe we don't hear about a lot and you don't see, but he had an impact in a big way with those. So obviously it's sad, and we just wish our prayers to the Salming family and know now that he is truly resting in peace. So I wanted to get that out of the way first on the podcast because I feel like it was, it's the most important thing going on right now. He deserves his moment. We will have him in our prayers, and now we get a chance to kind of look at what's going on with this Leafs team because there are going to be some that are going to be, there. I'm assuming we'll see some tributes in terms of like a sticker or something on the helmet, or some. I know they used to do patches on jerseys for players. I don't know if that's a thing. That's really going to be it. I don't know if that's still a thing. I know they did it for Pat Quinn all those years ago, or I think I'm trying to remember Johnny Bauer what they did. I think it's probably most likely going to be a tribute of some sort. So expect to see that for their first game against Minnesota. And let's see how many. I'm sure there's going to be some heavy hearts when they play that game. There were some players that certainly had a close connection and will want to play for their fallen countrymen. But before we go into the back-to-back games, I just want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by BetOnline.net. It is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football, basketball, soccer, esports, NHL. They've got you covered at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at betonline as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Welcome back into the Locked On These podcast. David Morassutti here. Mike DeStefano is not here, but that's okay. We're got a lot of things to discuss. A lot of more injury news since Mike and I last recorded, and that was to hear that Jordie Benn was placed on IR with an upper body injury. This team just can't catch a break, man. Like it's when I initially had saw that he was hunched over and dealing with some. Initially, we thought about lower body injury because of the groin injury he suffered during training camp. Then Sheldon Keefe said upper body injury. Didn't seem very optimistic. And then you see the IR announcement and you're just like, oh, It's just incredible to think how the injuries have piled up. Now you got Jordie Benn joining Morgan Riley, Jake Muzzin, and TJ Brody as the latest players who not only are out for a game or two, but a significant period. Kyle Dubas kind of mentioned that TJ Brody, they didn't expect him to be back for the rest of this road trip. So that ends in Detroit. So the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to have to rely heavily on the players that they obviously currently have. That's going to be tough. We already saw Mark Giordano and Justin Hall play well over 24 minutes. You don't want those guys playing over 24 minutes a game. But the Leafs really don't have much of an option right now. We also know that Connor Timmins, who was acquired from the Arizona Coyotes, isn't ready to play just yet. He's not going to be playing against Minnesota. The team wanted to give him a few skates to get himself ready. And I mean, the guy hasn't played NHL hockey since October, but he did get some AHL games. So I'm wondering, is this just a matter of just, letting him kind of take a breath and getting used to a new situation before you throw him into the fire? Because literally you're putting Connor Timmins in, given all the injuries, he's going to play some minutes. And I didn't hear any word about whether he would get in on this weekend. Obviously he's not playing against Minnesota, but I don't know if he would be making his debut potentially in Pittsburgh on the back-to-back. Um, if not against Pittsburgh, I would assume his debut would come Monday against the Detroit Red Wings. Just too many. I mean, that's a lot to ask of the current defense to have to play through. You want to have everybody kind of not fresh. You can't really keep guys fresh in this period because of all the injuries, but you know, making sure that if you got a Connor Timmins, you made that trade for him. You expect him to play in the NHL. He's on the roster. You're gonna have to expect him to get some games in. So as it sits right now, I'm just gonna pull up the Leafs defense. The Leafs lines in general, just to give you a sense of what's going on here. And then I'm gonna bring up the other news, and that's just some changes on the top part of the lineup here, and that's Kelly Yarncroke getting second line minutes with Don Tavares and Mitch Marner. I thought that to be very, very interesting. Considering, I didn't think Nick Robertson had a bad game against the Devils, but I think when they look at the upcoming matchup against the Minnesota Wild, this seems to make a little bit of sense. You kind of spread things around a little bit, and you also got to get Wayne Simmons in the lineup. And some people are going to say, Wayne Simmons. The Minnesota Wild just acquired I was just about to say Zach Aston-Reese. The Minnesota Wild just acquired Ryan Reeves. That's it. They just acquired Ryan Reeves. They already have, Mike Foligno on that team, he's a tough cookie. So you're gonna need a Wayne Simmons in the lineup just to kind of help out a little bit on that front. I mean, Wayne Simmons isn't able to do it all on his own, but you at least have someone like that in case things get a little out of hand. You could have a Wayne Simmons out there. As you can see on the defense, you got Giordano, Hull, Sandin, Liljegren, Mete, and Hollowell. That's going to be an interesting pairing considering, that's going to be the pairing that plays the least amount of time, obviously. Sandy and Liljegren are going to be playing. I think you'll be seeing a lot of that. Funny enough, Matt Murray didn't practice on the day before, and Samsonov and Shalgren were on the ice. So the interesting here is that the Leafs were saying that they weren't exactly sure if Samsonov would be ready to go for this week. I don't know if that meant this week and he won't play at all during the back-to-back. Maybe they'll see him play on Monday against Detroit, although if you have Matt, it all depends, I think, on what they do with Matt Murray. Sheldon Keefe didn't rule out the possibility of having Matt Murray play on the back-to-back. And the reason why it makes sense is because the Black Friday, the Black Friday game is at 2:00. So it's a little different when you have the 2:00. You get the night to kind of rest, the full day, and you got Pittsburgh. It also depends on the travel too, right? How How bad? How does he feel after travel? If he feels good, you might see him play the back to back, especially if Samsonov's ready to go for Monday against Detroit. You can have him back there. The only other thing I could say is, you know, maybe you give Shagrin, you just say, you know what, let's not risk it. Let's put Shagrin against Pittsburgh. I know he didn't exactly have his best. He wasn't at his best against the Islanders. You give him maybe that chance to, or no, turn things around. We'll see. That's gonna be, I think, one of the bigger things to watch for when it comes to this weekend. I'm gonna have actually more. I want to kind of break down a little bit more of the upcoming matchups, but those are just kind of a quick few hitters just to look at based on what we saw in practice in the last few days. So we're gonna take one more break, but before we do, I just want to remind everyone: subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We're seeing those subscriber numbers go up; they're steadily going up. I want to see this thing really, really start to take off. I really want to see us get closer to that 3,000 subscriber mark. I think we're just over 2,200, which is solid, but I think we can do a lot better. I want to make sure we stay ahead of the Locked On Canadians podcast. Got some work to do to get to the Locked On Senators podcast. Those guys have been busting their butts, and they got for the last few years, so they got a little bit of a head start on us. But I want to catch up to them as much as possible. So I'm going to take a quick break. Then we're going to go over the back-to-backs against Minnesota in Pittsburgh. So this is the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, welcome back to the Locked On These podcasts. David Morassutti here, and it's a very interesting back-to-back situation because I'm making sure I'm recording this before the Leafs play a game at 2 o'clock. The clock was ticking on this one, so it's a very what, I don't mind the afternoon games. Now here's the thing: I work, my work schedule is a lot different than everybody else's, so I don't mind if there's an afternoon game. I actually have the day off today, so this kind of works out well for me because I have the day off today and then I work on the weekend. So still get to watch the Leafs. Hopefully, you guys are able to watch this afternoon game because a very interesting matchup with the Minnesota Wild, who they're a team that's gone through quite a few ups and downs. Marc-Andre Fleury has not really been the goalie that I think they thought he was going to be you know, when they signed him. He was on the injured reserve. They are actually activating they're actually activating him off injured reserve for I'm assuming it's going to be for the Leafs game. But um, you know, the Minnesota Wild have been dealing with kind of very weird, I wouldn't say shaky goaltending, because Phil Gustafson, who they acquired in the trade for Cam Delwit, hasn't been bad for them. When Fleury went down, Gustafson went 2-1, had a 914 save percentage and a 2.34 goals against average. So not too bad, obviously, but you look at Marc-Andre Fleury, and this season, I'll say this: the record's not bad. He's 6-4-1 in 12 games, but he has a 2.80 goals against average and a .906 save percentage, which is not what they were expecting when they signed him. They wanted average goal. This is a little below average, not terrible, but I think they expected a little bit better from Marc-Andre Fleury. But um, he has a good chance to get himself back on track here. With obviously with the game against the Leafs here, the Wild have won their last few games. They're coming off a very impressive game against the Winnipeg Jets, where they were the better team start to finish. They won that game 6-1, and I'm looking at that game and what the Minnesota Wild do well. The Leafs are gonna have to really keep an eye on that. And these are kind of gonna be my keys to the game for this one, and which is the Wild are gonna want to be challenging this Leafs defense and going to the net. They're going to be trying to get a lot of those chances in tight. A lot of the goals of, I watched against the Jets, the Wild were getting rebounds or, getting in the goaltender's grill. This Leafs defense isn't exactly the one to push guys away. So Matt Murray is going to have to battle his way through what the Minnesota Wild are going to try to do. So the Leafs defense is going to have to make sure that those second chance opportunities, Mike brought up in the last podcast, he thinks the rebounds for Murray could be better. And I think that's something that's going to hold true in this game. Minnesota is going to do their best to get to the net, make sure they get to those second opportunities. Leafs defense is going to have to hold their ground a little bit here. They're going to have to try their best to make sure Minnesota doesn't get those second and third chances. The Devils got very fortunate that in terms of they had those opportunities, and unfortunately for them, they couldn't get it in. The Leafs were able to keep them out. Matt Murray was solid in that game, but it's not going to get any easier with Minnesota just because they're a bit of a bigger team. These are bigger buys are going to make things a little bit difficult for Toronto. Now, when you look at these two games, kind of the common theme that Mike and I have been bringing about is the offense at 5-on-5. The Leafs were better at that against New Jersey. They got both their goals at 5-on-5. They got to keep that going because Minnesota is a very good defensive team. They're not going to give up a lot off, at 5-on-5. So the Leafs are going to have to find their way to get things going a little bit. I found it interesting, obviously, with the Calle Jarnkrok being moved up to the second line. Is that more of a defensive thing? Is that more to get Jarnkrok going a little bit offensively? Maybe to get a bigger body onto that line? Uh, it's a very curious decision by Sheldon Keefe, but I think it's we saw Calle Jarnkrok play up in the lineup during the preseason, so not totally out of character for Sheldon Keefe to do a move like this. I also thought that line wasn't bad in New Jersey of Jarnkrok, Holmberg, and Engvall. But I guess, again, Sheldon Keefe is just trying different things, trying to see if he can find the better combination. So that's going to be something I'm going to watch for. How does Jarnkrok fit into the top six? Because obviously the Leafs have still not found that magic in some cases of getting that 5-on-5 scoring. And lower in the lineup, maybe they think Kerfoot can do better on the third line. I haven't really been high on Kerfoot. We brought it up. Just the lack of goals at 5-on-5 for Kerfoot, lack of production. Maybe they think if they put him in a little bit of an easier situation and keep him on that bottom six, that maybe something will spark. I'm not as confident, but crazier things have happened, so we'll see. Obviously, we'll be keeping an eye on the goaltending situation. Can Matt Murray, win this game, help them win this game against Minnesota, and then we'll see how the one against Pittsburgh, how Pittsburgh shapes up. So something to definitely keep an eye on there. And since there's not too much time before the next game, I'm not going to keep us here too long because we'll likely be breaking down a lot of what's going on the after this weekend's game. We will also have a bit of a review on the Leafs quarter mark. I mean, the Leafs are at the quarter mark of the season. We'll break things down. I want to wait until after this stretch of games, just because then we'll get a real sense after a road trip like this, and it's truly the quarter mark of the season. We'll break down kind of, good things and bad things with that's going on with the Leafs and things that they need to work on, things that they need to keep doing well. We'll do all that after likely, kind of in between the road games going up here, because we'll be back again on Monday and we'll go through the weekend games. We'll also preview Monday's game against the Detroit Red Wings, so it's a very busy time for the Leafs. They got quite a few games, to end this road trip, 3 games in 4 days. So we'll be keeping you up to date on all that. But until then, I want to thank you all for if you made it all the way through the end of the podcast. Thank you very much. I know doing these solo shows gets a little tough. So I appreciate you guys hanging in for as long as you did. So until next time, keep locked right here on Locked On Leafs.